Hey guys, it's Brenny, and tonight is August 8th. Only 13 more days, and then I'm gonna be a 10th grader. Here is last year's recap, so please enjoy. On January 10th at 8:08 p.m., my baby brother Oliver was born. Afterwards, it was just kinda, yeah, afterwards. And then 2 months later, and then 2 months later, on March 21st, my grandpa ended up going to the hospital because he had been sick for a long time. Afterwards, 8 days later, so March 29th, he came home and he was put in hospice care. And I was staying with my mom when I heard the news that he came home. So I told my mom I'm ready to go home, and she's okay with it. So I walk into my grandpa's room with his hospital bed and a little table next to him. And I'm like, I've been really worried about you. And we put a baby monitor where he slept. And I said, and every night some nights I would lay in my grandma's bed with her. But when my grandma was busy, my grandpa would say, hey, Brendo, it's actually Brenda, but who gives a crap? And I'm like, she's busy right now, what's up? He said, I need to use the bathroom. He would lean on my shoulder. He would hold on to my shoulders. Then afterwards, he got like 2 walkers and a wheelchair. And then almost a month later, so let's go to April 19th. Actually, let's go to April 18th. That night, he was put to sleep. And April 19th, I woke the next day, so April 19th, I woke up and said, good morning, dude. Good morning, dude. And then I got ready for school, and then my Aunt Ruth came and picked me up. Then, when she would pick me up from school, she would give me a bag of candy. But since she forgot some, we ended up stopping at Merchandise Outlet, and I got some Reese's. Then afterwards, we checked out and we went home. And my grandpa was still sleeping. And then I was staying the weekend with my dad. He wasn't able to take me. And so what happened is I was gonna go over to my grandma Denise's house, And I'm like, that's fine with me. But my Grandpa Wayne was actually gonna watch me over the weekend. And then on the 21st, on the 20th at 8:16 p.m., he passed away. And afterwards, the next day, April 21st, my grandpa, so my cousin, like, I had told people that he was still alive and that he was still sleeping. Well, so my younger cousin, she wanted to go to McDonald's. So we hopped in my grandpa's Buick and we drove to McDonald's. After we ate, he took me home. My grandma comes out the side door and says, "Hey, dude, he passed away." And I'm like, "What?" I was shocked. And you're probably asking me, why haven't you been on channel since January 7th, 2024? I ended up locking my own account, my Apple account, and then 3 months later, April 14th, so 6 days before my grandpa died, we went to the Apple store in Lansing and we got it. And I got a whole new account. I had to use my backup account though. I figured the sign in to my old account, and boomer sooner, baby, I was back online. And then my grandpa, he was a great farmer, but not that great at his balance. And then, like, he was 68 years old when he died. And to make this more saddening, he died only 4 days shy of his 69th birthday. So, let's fast forward to April 22nd, the next day. I went to school and I told everybody the news. One of the school's counselor, which she would watch me she would talk to me in the cafeteria. Miss Fox, as she's like to be called, she would come over to where I was sitting, and I said, "My grandpa, he passed away this weekend." And she says, "I am so sorry to hear that." And I said, "Thank you." And I said, just a heads up, I won't be here on Wednesday because that's when we're having the funeral. And that's what happened. Oh, that's just my neighbor pulling into his driveway. But his living room lights are on, which makes me really confused. But anyways, and then my math teacher, I said, "Listen, I'm not gonna be here on Wednesday because of the funeral." So fast forward to April 24th, that's when we had the funeral. Like at around 9:10, 9:11. We get to the funeral home, and my grandma said, "I want a minute alone with him." And I said, "Fine." I went back into, so I go back into the break room, and my aunt Melissa asks me how I'm doing. I said, "I'm good." And then I go out into the main section of the funeral home, and I just started crying. And I said to my grandma, "I want to see him." And she's like, "Okay, I'll take you into the chapel." And there he was, laying in his casket. And I cried 3 times at the funeral. When I entered, and then when they were playing, and then we had the visitation. We then had the visitation. So then afterwards, the funeral service started, and I cried when they were playing Amazing Grace over the speakers. My mom and my dad were there comforting me. And then they played another song called "I Can Only Imagine" by Mercy Me. If you haven't heard that song yet, you should. And this goes to anybody who doesn't have any strong feelings. And then the third time I cried is when the service ended and we were going to the hall, to the reception center, and my uncle Rich, he was, so it was just not a good day at all. And I'm like, I can't believe he's gone. And then afterwards, actually, I should have said, "I'll go eat in a minute." The only things that he left behind are his wallet, his glasses, and his Mickey Mouse hat that he would wear all the time. And then the next day, he was taken to the crematorium because when he died, he wanted to be cremated. So afterwards, the next day, my grandma went to the crematorium to pick him up. Actually, it was the 25th, because that's when he was cremated. And then, fast forward 2 months later, my great-grandpa of 86 years passed away. The really cool thing about him is, he was in the Army from 1958 until his honorable discharge in 1960. And then the same funeral home where we had my grandpa's at, which is Lux, we had his visitation and a prayer service for him. It was just sad. My grandpa Wayne, he brought me to the funeral home because I wanted to go see him. in the car, I was already starting to cry. An employee welcomed us, and I'm like, huh, where is everybody? And the employee said, they're in the chapel. And I'm like, okay, thank you. I opened the door, and he was in a nice oak casket. And I'm like, my mom was, and I just started crying. My mom was actually there to comfort me because he was actually my mom's grandpa. And the next day we had his funeral. So June 25th. I forgot to mention the 24th was his visitation and prayer service. So then the next day we head over to Beale City for the funeral. And then we go into the church. We go into the church, and he was all the way at the back. And I'm like, but then I said my final words to him. Like, it was emotional. A little later, my mom showed up. And then, like 10 minutes later, my dad showed up. Everybody that he knew was there. That everybody that knew him was all at the funeral. Then at 10 a.m., the funeral started. They, like, he looked so comfy in his casket. And he would go to church every Sunday. And when he passed away, they put his rosary under his hands. And there was even a photo slot holder. He died just 1 month after turning 86. So he passes away. So, and then we go into the chapel, and I sat between my mom and my dad. It was very stressful. And then they gave him a white cloth, which I can't even remember because that was a whole year ago when we had his funeral. And then, like, and he had been married for 55 years until my great-grandmother's passing in 2019. Except they got married in October of 1963, and then in 1998 she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. Then they put an American flag over his casket. Then we went to the Knights of Columbus Hall for the lunch. And then our priest made us all say grace. And we got done saying grace, we started eating. We started eating but I actually, before we left the church, I was crying in my car. Then I got out because it was extremely hot in the car. So afterwards, some family relatives, like Alexis, who was one of them, and I said, "Thank you for coming to my great-grandpa's funeral, Alexis." She said, "No problem. Do you want a hug?" And I'm like, "Yes." Like, so afterwards, we go to the hall, we eat, and then we were on our way to the cemetery. And then we can't do guns in town, unfortunately. It's the town law. But they did play taps, honor the fallen. So, and then they lowered the casket into the vault. And after they put him into the ground, we threw our flowers in. We threw our flowers in, and he recently had his headstone carved with his death date because after the burial, it never got done. So for a whole year, he sat with no death date on his headstone. Until just 2 weeks ago, well, actually just last week, they carved his headstone. But yeah, afterwards, we went to the Beale City Tavern for a remembrance. Then after 3 or 4 hours of being there, I was ready to go home. So I had my aunts and my uncle take me home. I started crying and then I got a nosebleed. So I run over to the kitchen sink and make it stop. It always helps me if I blow and then I rinse. And then 2 months later, let's fast forward to August 21st, we had our open house. Because I was going into my 9th grade year. So I get my schedule and I go check out my classrooms. I started with the ones on the upper floors. And then we went to the lower floors to check the low. And then 6 days later, so August 27th, we had our first day of school. And I thought my bus was going to show up, but it didn't. And I almost got on the wrong bus. So I ended up walking all the way to school. And it went great for the first day. My grandma was called to pick me up after I missed the bus. And she said, "How did you get to school then?" I said, "Well, I ended up walking all the way." And she said, "That's just sad. How about I get you Pixies for dinner?" And I'm like, "How about I get you Pixie for dinner?" And I'm like, "Sure." We go over to Pixie, we go through the drive-thru, and then we go pick up our food, and then we went home. Then my grandma called the bus garage, and then they told me my exact number. Except this time I had her wait with me. So then the next day, August 28th, it was the second day of school, and I seen the bus that I was going to ride. Afterwards, the bus driver welcomed me. We went and picked up another student. And then afterwards, we dropped kids off at the middle school, and then I was dropped off at the high school. So, in my high school, we only have 5 classes a day, including lunch. So, after lunch, I went to my 3rd hour class, which was my math class period. And then we were doing a math worksheet. Actually, not a worksheet. We were taking math notes. And then I felt something running right down my nose. It turns out I started having a bloody nose. And I'm like, oh man, not now. And my math teacher looks at me and she says, what happened? I said, I'm having a bloody nose. And she sends me to the boys' bathroom to go rinse off in the sink. And it was time for the second lunchers to go have their lunch breaks. That could have happened at the worst timing possible. And then afterwards, I was sent down to the boys' bathroom to go get washed up. Then I heard on a walkie-talkie that they said, there is somebody with a bloody nose in Blue Pod Boys' bathroom. So then they grab a first aid kit and they have me put gauze over my nose. My Rolling Stones 1978 shirt was just covered in blood. I was sent to the office because I was being sent home to get changed up. And then I went back up to my locker and get all the stuff that I needed. I told my 4th hour teacher, which was English, I said, hey, I'm not going to be able to attend 4th hour because I had a pretty bad bloody nose. And she said, all right, hopefully I'll see you tomorrow. I go to my locker and get all my things. My grandma comes, picks me up, and I ended up just going home for the day. But my buddy posted on Facebook that there had been a fire drill over at my school. And actually, it wasn't actually real. Apparently, one of the vents got clogged. One of the vents ended up getting clogged. I think it was either 4th or 5th hour. I think it was 4th hour. I don't know. So then the next day, which is August 29th, my grandma ends up keeping me home because she said it must be a sinus infection. So she has me stay home. And then, so she has me stay home, and then, but yeah. And then, a little less than a month later, my grandpa was buried in the cemetery. So, September 28th, so less than a month later, he was buried. There were multiple different songs. Amazing Grace by Alan Jackson. Jealous of the Angels by Donna Taggart. I Can Only Imagine by not Mercy Me, but by somebody else. And then there was one song that I never did catch the name of. It was emotional. Afterwards, we threw in our flowers. And I wanted to say a few words. And yeah, a few days before, I ended up writing a goodbye note to him. And we get a tractor, which is a New Holland T8. He used to drive it. My uncle, he drives it over to where his ashes were. Lots and lots of people had shown up. And my mom and my dad were one of them. I asked my Uncle Jeff if I could ride with him in the tractor, and he was okay with it. So we hop in the tractor and we start driving to where we were gonna say goodbye to him. And then we gave him 2 of his favorite snacks, Fiddle Faddle and cheese balls. And he was also taken with a little shot of Fireball. And then we got a picture, and they said, and my grandma said, "Does anybody want to say anything to him?" And I said, "I'm gonna really miss you." I sat between my mom and my dad. He would go for one last tractor ride. And then we got to the cemetery and we buried him. We threw in our flowers and we took a bucket of dirt and dumped it all in. And there was still a layer of grass, so we ended up putting that on top. We left a few things there. The day before, we were getting his headstone done. And we were going headstone shopping. So my grandma pulled me from school. I told my 4th hour teacher, which was my English class period, that I would be leaving early because my grandma and my aunt are taking me headstone shopping for my grandpa. And she was okay with it. At about 12:32 p.m., my English teacher gets a call on the phone, and she said, all right, I'll send him down. And it was actually time for me to go. Like, some days I had to be pulled from school early. And yeah. Then afterwards, we go to St. Louis. And yeah. And then afterwards, we went to Ollie's and it was actually my first time going in there. I got Beast Wars Pterosaur, and then, so then we go home, we have the burial the next day. Well, actually, let's go back 3 weeks earlier. My uncle and my aunt had gotten married a few months prior. We had their wedding reception at their own house. It was me, my grandma, and my 2 aunts. My dad was gonna have to watch over me, but he couldn't. And neither could my mom. So I ended up going, and it felt amazing. And I said, the only reason I could come here is that neither my mom or my dad could watch me. Like, then a picture of my grandpa and I just started crying. It was just emotional, in my opinion. And I have a seat in a chair, and then my Aunt Courtney comes up to me, and I'm like, uh-oh. She said, hey, you're not in trouble. What's wrong? Do you miss him? And I said, I really do. But I was the spotlight of attention on the dance floor. DJ Robbie, he was a pretty nice guy. And there was one song that I wanted to listen to, and that's what happened. Hey, you got your hazard lights on! Yeah, they listened to me. Some car turned with its hazard lights on. And then a month later, let's fast forward to Halloween. Me and a friend, we went trick-or-treating. We ended up going trick-or-treating together. But first, we had to stop at the nursing home and go see my great-grandma. She would hand us packs of Oreos and have little candies. So then my grandma takes me over to my friend's house, and then we start going trick-or-treating. I was an inflatable alien, and my friend, he was a scary wolf. Speaking of scary, I was jump scared. Like, I thought it was a statue. He screamed. And I'm like, goodness. And I'm like, ah! But I still got candy overall. Then I seen another friend and her name is Hannah. But now she's homeschooled and she's doing online school. So now, and then I seen my 8th grade history teacher at one house. But then afterwards, I got some candy from her, and then 2 other friends showed up, and that friend was none other then Rail Fanning Train Hardy. Also, this shout out goes to him for being an amazing friend. Along with Bella and I can't remember that other one. But then anyways, after we went trick-or-treating, I called my grandma and told her, hey, it's time to pick me up. And she said, all right, I'll be there as soon as I can. 3 days later, I had me and my dad's birthday party. So then we had cake, and then I opened my presents. I had gotten a Ratchet figure. Well, actually, I went live for that. If you haven't seen that video yet, go check it out. It's pretty cool. Then afterwards, I went to... And then afterwards, I went... And then 3 days later, it was my 15th birthday. But yeah, 3 days later, it was my actual birthday. My bus pulls up to my driveway, and I told her, hey, today is my 15th birthday, and she said, oh, happy birthday. While I'm at it, what kind of candy bar do you want? And I said, I'll take a Hershey's bar. And she said, all right, when I come back to pick you up in the afternoon, I'll give you your little birthday treat. And that's what happened. And after I get home, then the bus turns on its warnings. Then my bus driver turns on the warning lights, and then she opens the door, and then, which we all know that activates a stop sign. But I think it's like a late 2000s Thomas safety liner. But yeah, anyways, afterwards, she said, happy birthday and have a good day. And I'm like, thank you, you too. So I go inside and I have my little birthday candy bar. And then afterwards, but earlier that day, we had a Veterans Day assembly. And so afterwards, the assistant teacher, 5th hour was my science class. So afterwards, the assistant teacher, Miss Simon, she says, all right, it's 2:30. Have a nice day and happy birthday. And I said, all right, thank you very much. So I go up to my locker and grab everything. The bus comes. And then afterwards, boom. Just like that, I was home. Then came Thanksgiving. We went over to my aunt's house for Thanksgiving. Well, actually, before Halloween, we were carving pumpkins. And unfortunately, I ended up slicing my finger open with a knife. And it hurt bad. And I was with my dad at that time. And then I started crying because I was in so much pain because of it. Well, actually, just in my hand. Afterwards, but yeah, let's fast forward to Thanksgiving. We head over to my aunt's. We head over to my aunt's house. And so on and so forth. We normally do. Then came my cousin's 11th birthday. We went to 11th. Well, actually, he was born in 2014, so he was 10. He'll be 11 this year, I should say. Man, I am so bad at counting. But yeah, afterwards, we went to his birthday party, and actually, during our little Thanksgiving dinner, we actually had his birthday. We actually had his birthday party at the exact same time. Goodness gracious. It was just a bike beeping. On Christmas Eve, I got to open all of my presents early because I was staying the rest of the week with my dad for Christmas. Afterwards, I come home on the 29th of December. Then we did party poppers for New Year's Eve. And then came the countdown. We turned on the TV and we started watching the countdown. And then after 1, I shouted, "Happy New Year!" We'll talk about this year's recap sometime next year. But thank y'all for watching. Like and subscribe. And please, I am only 5 subscribers away from reaching my goal. I'll talk to you later. Like, subscribe, and turn on post notifications. Otherwise, those videos that I make in the future, you're gonna miss out on. So, but thank you all so much for watching. Peace around the world. Around the world for generations.